It hadn't always been that way. In the early years of my life, I had been the young prince in our home. I was Dad's first son, and he was a man for whom sons were a symbol of his own strength and manhood. He was a very kind father to Kitty, who was the child of his first marriage, but he couldn't help being a little cocky about his son. He used to take me everywhere, out to the ballparks, to the amusement park where I could try every ride and eat popcorn to my fill, down to the plant to meet his friends who thought my old-fashioned name and sober face were funny. I used to hear Dad bragging to them, "You should see this boy eat. It's all Mary and I can do to keep him full of milk and potatoes. What we'll do when he's 15, I don't know." And that was true. He didn't know. By the time I was 15, the problem of a healthy appetite was no longer funny. We went through some bad times, beginning with the year I was 5, the year Joey was born. My brother was a sickly baby, given only a slim chance of living. Mom and Dad wore themselves out that year, taking turns at sitting up all night to rescue Joey from strangling spasms that threatened to snuff his life out. There was huge doctor bills and anxiety over money, as well as the puny child. There was great fatigue for both my parents, and Dad was not a man who took hardship or physical discomfort quietly. If I forgot that Joey was asleep and came into the house banging doors and yelling, as I'd always done, Dad would turn on me in a way that soon convinced me he'd lost all the love for me he'd ever had. Kitty escaped much of his frustration, being older and gentler by nature. She used to play quiet games with me and take me for long walks to keep me away from the baby's room. I loved Kitty very much, Kitty and Mom, but a harshness sprang up between Dad and me during the first years of Joey's life. Somehow that harshness increased with time, intensified by the unyielding coldness I felt toward Dad, a stubborn unwillingness ever to respond to his attempts toward regaining my affection. Those attempts grew more infrequent as times grew worse. In 1930, there were fewer and fewer hours of work each week for Dad. In 1932, he lost his job completely. With that loss, with the loss of his savings when the bank closed, maybe with the loss of being the proud man he'd once been, Dad's attitude toward me grew less and less like that of a father who loves his son. He was a man who had liked to talk about how he had pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, how he, a poor immigrant in 1910, had risen to be foreman at work, had a small, neat home with a mortgage gradually dwindling, was able to take his family for Sunday rides in his own automobile, could buy his wife an electric sewing machine for Christmas. And if he could do all this, was there any reason why others couldn't? None whatever, except that those who hadn't done as well were lazy, improvident, or stupid. And then suddenly his bootstraps, his industry, his shrewdness and thriftness were worth nothing. He was as powerless to save his home, to feed his family properly, to feel an ounce of pride or confidence in himself as any man he had scorned in former years. It was hard for Dad, I knew, but his unreasonable rages, in which I was usually the whipping boy, bewildered me at first and then angered me deeply. Mom had talked with me many times about him. "We must be patient with him, Josh. He's a good man. Just wrong in letting his desperation get the better of his reason. We mustn't forget the goodness in him, just because we can't go along with some of the things we are sorry about." She never would actually come out and agree with me that Dad had done anything wrong. It was always, "I know, Josh. I know, dear. Let's just be a little patient." That morning, as we stood in the dark kitchen together, I made a vow that I'd try to be patient with Dad, if only for her sake. She was so little, so bent with weariness and worry, that I felt a great tenderness for her. I patted her shoulder as I placed my empty cup on the table. "Get another hour of rest, Mom. You don't have to be up before 6. She nodded, but I knew she wouldn't go back to bed. She'd be afraid of oversleeping, of failing to have breakfast ready as each of her family made an appearance in the kitchen. She worked too hard, cared too much about the rest of us. It worried me, and to give Dad credit, I must admit, worried him too. They were sitting together, Mom and Dad, at the kitchen table when I got back. He looked beaten and disheveled, but not angry as he so often did. He was holding Mom's hand, and they were talking quietly when I came into the room. Mom got up to fix the breakfast she had promised 3 hours before. "We have a few eggs this morning," she said. Then she noticed that I shivered as I drew close to the stove. "Oh, Josh, you didn't wear your sweater. Didn't you see that I had laid it out on the chair for you? These mornings are too chilly for—" Her words touched off Dad's ready anger. He turned toward me furiously. "Must your mother dress you like you are 3 years old again? Must she be worried with all her other worries because you show no responsibility, even for wearing the right clothes? It will be fine, won't it, when you catch a cold and we have doctor's bills on top of everything else? I started to say something that blazed up inside me, something about the fact that I was at least earning a little to buy food for us, but I caught the pleading in Mom's face and I kept quiet. Dad sat for a moment, looking from one of us to the other. Then he got up and put his arms around Mom. Forgive me, Mary. Please forgive me. Why do I say things to the boy that hurt you? I think there is a meanness in me.